September 7, 1996, at the MGM Grand Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada, Tupac Shakur attended a Mike Tyson boxing match. After the match, Tupac left with Suge Knight, who at the time was CEO of the West Coast record label, Death Row Records, the label that Tupac was signed to. However, on the night with Orlando Anderson in the lobby of the MGM casino.
In the lobby?
In the lobby of the MGM. Orlando Anderson was a member of the Compton-based Southside Crips gang. After the brawl, Suge Knight and Tupac left in Knight's car with Tupac's entourage following in cars behind them. While stopped at a traffic light at the intersection of Flamingo and Koval, a white Cadillac pulled up on the passenger side of Knight's car and shot out of the window, hitting Tupac 4 times and grazing Knight in the head with a bullet fragment. In 2014, 18 years after the shooting, Chris Carroll, a now retired Las Vegas Police Department sergeant, came forward to say he was first at the scene. According to Carroll, when he opened the car door, Tupac fell out of the car covered in blood, and Carroll asked, quote, "Who shot you?" and states that Tupac took a breath to respond and said, quote, "Fuck you," before slipping into unconsciousness, making those Tupac's last words. Tupac was taken to the University Medical Center and placed on life support in a medically induced coma. And on September 13, 1996, 6 days after the shooting, Tupac died due to his injuries at the age of 25. But Yaki Gaddafi, a member of Tupac's entourage who was there that evening, who claimed he could identify the assailant. However, Gaddafi was unfortunately murdered 2 months later on November 10, 1996, before he could be interviewed.
Wow.
A Las Vegas homicide detective who oversaw the case claimed it got, quote, "the same treatment as any other homicide here," end quote. Former LA Times journalist Chuck Phillips, who believes that Orlando Anderson, the Crips gang, and none other than Biggie Smalls are responsible for the murder. Chuck Phillips and the LA Times investigated the murder over the course of a year and came up with the following conclusions based on anonymous sources. Conclusion 1. Members of the Southside Crips were involved in the shooting as retaliation for Tupac's beating of Orlando Anderson. Conclusion 2. Orlando Anderson was the shooter. Conclusion 3. Biggie Smalls paid $1 million for the murder of Tupac and supplied the gun. Speaking of Biggie, let's go over his potential motive for wanting Tupac dead. Biggie's year-long feud with Tupac was well known, and at the forefront of the East Coast-West Coast rap rivalry, including a reported verbal altercation and diss tracks. In one track titled Hit 'Em Up, Tupac claimed he had slept with Biggie's wife. According to Phillips, neither Biggie nor anyone connected to Biggie was questioned by the police.
Wow, okay.
As for Orlando Anderson, the believed shooter, he was shot to death in May 1998. Up until his death, Anderson denied responsibility for Tupac's death and was never charged. The second theory is from former LAPD detective Russell Poole, who believes that Suge Knight set up the murder. Despite Suge Knight also being hit in the shooting, Detective Poole believes Suge Knight had motives. Motive 1. Suge Knight apparently owed Tupac a lot of money, by some accounts $3 million, a theory corroborated by the fact that Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mother, sued Death Row and Knight in 1997 for mishandling funds and taking millions of dollars away from Tupac. Motive 2. Tupac intended to leave Death Row Records, Suge Knight's label. Tupac had recently fired his lawyer David Kenner, who in addition to being Suge Knight's lawyer, also wrote up Tupac's agreement with Death Row Records. And sure enough, a week after the firing, Suge Knight invited Tupac to the fateful boxing match. Here's some other things that don't look good for Suge Knight. Shortly after the brawl in the MGM lobby, Knight stopped to make a phone call while everyone else was fleeing the scene. Knight also insisted that Tupac ride with him in his car after the boxing match, but Anderson, the man who Tupac fought with at MGM, also contradicted his initial testimony, at first saying Knight was part of the MGM brawl, but then later saying that Knight was trying to break up the fight, stating, quote, "I seen him pulling people off of me," end quote. Many people believe this turnaround happened because of a payoff by Knight. Detective Poole also claims the bullet wound Knight says he received that night was never verified by the hospital, the police, or any other witnesses. The 2014 report from former Las Vegas Police Sergeant Chris Carroll, who stated that Knight's head was, quote, "gushing blood," and that he had, quote, "clearly been hit in the head." Carroll also mentioned that Knight showed legitimate concern and that, quote, "this is not the guy who had him killed. It's ridiculous." Theory is from LAPD detective Greg Kading, who believes that Sean Combs, aka P. Diddy or Puff Daddy, and CEO of the East Coast record label Bad Boy Records, orchestrated Tupac's death. Detective Kading got a Crips gang member named Keith Davis to confess on tape that P. Diddy paid him $1 million to carry out the murder of Tupac and Suge Knight. Keith Davis confessed that Orlando Anderson, who was Davis's nephew, was the one who pulled the trigger. And Davis also admits to being in the car when he recounts the night that Tupac was shot. Quote, "Orlando rolled down the window and popped him. If they would have drove on my side, I would have popped them." End quote. Keith Davis claims the motive behind P. Diddy's hit was due to fear that Suge Knight would strike first, and that Tupac was only included in the hit because P. Diddy was pissed off about Tupac's song Hit 'Em Up. Furthermore, before Tupac was killed, he was shot multiple times on November 30th, 1994 at Quad Recording Studios in New York City. Tupac repeatedly stated that he suspected people associated with P. Diddy were the perpetrators, a suspicion corroborated by a 2011 confession from Dexter Isaac, who claimed he was hired by a P. Diddy associate to rob Tupac that night. However, P. Diddy has denied involvement in the murder, stating, quote, "This story is pure fiction and completely ridiculous," end quote. And for what it's worth, Keith Davis was reportedly looking at 25 years to life due to unrelated activities if he didn't reveal his story is that the Jewish Defense League, an extremist pro-Israel group, killed Tupac. The FBI had files of alleged death threats on Tupac from the Jewish Defense League, which has been classified as a terrorist group by the FBI. Believed that Tupac is in fact still alive and faked his own death. In 2015, some news outlets reported that a man named David Myers claimed he helped Tupac fake his death and that Suge Knight, among others, helped as well.